bank of the Nile. And the ugly thin cows ate up the 7 attractive plump cows, and Pharaoh awoke. And he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. The 7 plump, full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it for me. I have heard it said that you, when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered to Pharaoh, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Favorable answer. Anybody ever woke up in the middle of the night having a dream, startled by it, and then said, I want to go back to sleep and find out how that dream ends? Has anybody ever done that? I've done it. Under drugs? Well, mine were quite clear-headed, or so I thought. But I think this dream is so unusual. I want to go back to sleep and see how this ends. And very, very rarely it'll continue on. I'll wake up just enough and it'll continue on. But most of the time it never happens. But so Pharaoh wakes up after he's had the dream about the 7 fat cows and the 7 ugly cows who swallow them up. He wakes up, he goes back to sleep in the middle of the night, then he has the second dream. And before we get to the end, why do you think he dreamed twice? Joseph is going to answer that for us if you've read on ahead. He has the dream, he has 2 different dreams to show, God is showing him that it is going to happen. Sometimes when they have these dreams, remember how many times did Joseph dream? He dreamed twice. He dreamed about the shocks that were bowing down, then he dreamed about the moon, the sun, and the stars bowing down. And sometimes that's the way that that he works, this way. So the cupbearer, and as we look at it and see that in God's own time brought about this. And why do you think that it took 2 years for the cupbearer to come to this decision? Time wasn't right. I have no idea. I don't have the answer to that. I just know that, we would think that maybe it would have been 2 weeks after that, or 2 days, that maybe Pharaoh would have had that dream, and the cupbearer says, hey, just day before yesterday I was in there. Remember you hang the bread guy, and you restored it. 2 days ago I had this dream. Or maybe if it was 2 weeks ago. He said, it was a couple weeks ago. Or maybe it was 2 months ago. But 2 whole years go by. And Joseph is in prison, and he's having a good time, no problems, right? No, he's languishing. And remember what he says, get me out of this pit. In verse 15 of chapter 40, he says, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into this pit. And it's called the pit a few times here. They took him out of the pit, and then he shaved, and he put on his nice clothes in order to go before Pharaoh. So and the time keeps languishing for Joseph in all of this. And it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Some of the versions say, without God it is not possible to give Pharaoh an answer about his welfare. Then continuing in verse 17, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream I was standing on the banks of the Nile. And to understand, before we go any further, to understand the significance of the Nile was considered a god to the Egyptians. I mean, virtually everything to the Egyptians was a god. If it was a snake, or if it was a bird in the sky, or they had so many gods in their time, but the Nile would have been very significant. These were coming up out of the Nile. I was standing on the banks of the Nile. 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up out of the Nile and fed on reed grass. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and thin, such as I had never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the thin, ugly cows ate up the first 7 plump cows. But when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were still as ugly as at the beginning. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream 7 ears growing on one stalk, full and good. 7 ears withered, thin and blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that come up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dreams means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years, and let them gather all the food for these years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. Now, as Joseph is telling this, he wants Pharaoh to find a man. Do you think Joseph was building his resume so that Pharaoh would pick him? He may have been. I don't know. But now we can, that light goes on, and we begin to see that Joseph has spent, at this point, let me backtrack and do my math. Joseph has spent 13 years in service, either in Potiphar's service or in jail, because the famine is going to last for 7 years, and then 5 years. So let me do the math again. He is, he's about 30 years old. Pardon me. I'm trying to do the math real quick. Because in verse 46 it says Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. So he's 30 years old, and he spent 13 years in Potiphar's house, handling his house, and then he spent part of that time also in prison. And what is God doing to Joseph? He's preparing Joseph to be over the land of Egypt. He's becoming mature, exactly. Now, when Pharaoh says, I've asked all of the magicians of Egypt, and they can't come up with this. The magicians, the people of Egypt, were known for their wisdom. If you go back to the book of 1 Kings, somewhere in chapter 3 or chapter 4, when Solomon was given his wisdom, he said he was wiser than all of these people of the East, and he was wiser than all of the wiseacres, the wise guys of Egypt as well. So they were known for their wisdom in Egypt. But Pharaoh says the magicians can't answer this. And why couldn't they answer it? It's a message from God, and they would not have known this. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar, in centuries forward, he's going to have dreams, and no one's going to answer it, but he's going to want to kill them. But Daniel says, no, don't do that. God alone has the interpretation for it. So we see that woven throughout, that God is the one that gives those dreams that are in need of interpretation by those who have been gifted by God. So here we have that Joseph is being prepared. Now, how many of us think that Joseph understood that right from the get-go when they took him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites? He says, oh, I know what's happening. God's preparing me to be second only to Pharaoh in Egypt. Yeah. No one believes that. No one would think that. Now, I'll take Corbin. Only for a moment. You can have him back, really, because you're going to need the tax write-off. But, Corbin, I can't read minds, and I don't know people's hearts. But I can almost guarantee that you've gone through struggles this past year. Is that right? And I'm not a mind reader. But I can also, with a certain degree of certainty, that's too many certainties there, know that something that's happened to you in the last year is preparing you for something that's going to happen in the future. How do I know that? Because we have seen it enough times in the Bible that if we are perceptive to these things, and remember what I read from Hebrews chapter 6, end of chapter 5? It says, the mature, those people who have had their minds prepared. We're moving on to maturity. So we're preparing our minds. And that's how we come to maturity, by constant use of this. So, but you knew that already, didn't you, Corbin? You knew you were being prepared for something in the future. See? See how wise he is? Yes. And, Tim? I've heard that. See, and we don't need a special interpretation of a dream to know that, do we? Because it's written in God's Word. And if we are wise enough to understand that there's something happening in our lives. Now, it doesn't mean that next week you're going to figure it out. Because if you know that, then I'm going to come over and tell you all my woes and you can figure it out for me. Because I can't figure it out. But I know that something is being worked out. Something is being laid in my lap, so to speak, that is preparing me for something that's in the future. Joseph, I'm quite sure, had no idea that those 13 years were preparing him for the service in Pharaoh. And who would have thought? And remember, when he's going to talk to his brothers and says, go back and, it's me, Joseph. It's me, Joseph. I'm your brother. And they can't say anything because for all they knew, he had been killed. They go back to the pit and he's gone. Yeah, 1 or 2 years. He has his, what degree do you get after 2 years? You get your I got associate's degree in hotel motel management. I don't know, whatever it is. But, 13 years, that gives him, a couple of PhDs in this. And so he tells Pharaoh, says, you need to put somebody, this is how would Joseph would have known what he has to do for Pharaoh, what Pharaoh has to do in order to survive this famine. Who said it? Yeah. Somehow or another, he knows this. And it is perhaps somewhere in this time that, that light that goes on. How many of you see that light when it goes on in your head? And you say, oh, I get that. Yeah, that makes perfect sense now. That at some point in here, maybe it's beginning to make sense to Joseph that you were put in charge of a household, then I'm going to put you in charge of these things in the prison, and no matter what you do, and remember if we go back far enough here, in about chapter 39, it says, and God was with him. And God was with him. And God was with him. All this time preparing him. Because when Potiphar said, here's my household, and Joseph does such a good job that Potiphar doesn't have to think about anything. It's just, I don't have to tell you what, you just go take care of it. And the jailer, who's in charge of the jail, discovers the same thing about Joseph. And how many of you, of a boss, want to have someone like that working for you? And usually, what do we call those people? I call them secretaries. That's what the boss really wants. A secretary that can do it all. Really? We know that. The secretary is usually the one that runs the corporation. And so Joseph is coming to this. And in verse 37 of chapter 41, it says, this proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? Is that a rhetorical question? Pharaoh's sitting there, and the rest of the guys are sitting there, and there's Joseph standing there. He's just interpreting. He says, boy, anybody got some resumes here? Can anybody think of someone? Can anybody, Joseph, can you think of anybody like that? And it's standing right there in front of him, what he has to do.
He just laid it all out for him, and then he said, you got to get somebody to do this.
Yeah, and Pharaoh comes to the conclusion, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? Can we find anybody like this in whom is the Spirit of God? So it's a rhetorical question. Can we find anybody like this, Joseph, in whom is the Spirit of God? Is there anybody like him? Anybody? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Boy, Joseph just angles his way in there, doesn't he? And all that time that he's in Potiphar's house and in the jail, he's thinking, one of these days I'm going to be over all of Egypt. Now, who would have known that? We're talking about Egypt, which is at the time, under that dynasty, there would have been, I'm thinking that there might have been only a couple of dynasties, the whole world, that could have competed with that, but overall, Pharaoh is the greatest. Pharaoh appears to be pretty smart. Yeah. And so we don't know if this is, there's a lot of discussion as to which Pharaoh this was, whether it was Ramses the first, and later on it was going to be Ramses the second, or who this was, but it wasn't Steve Martin, I know that. You'd have to know his song. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he made him ride in his second chariot. And they called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphenath-Paneah. And if you can pronounce that better, let me know, and I'll have you pronounce it the next time. And he gave him in marriage Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out of the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt and put the food in the cities. And he put in every city the food from the fields around it. And Joseph stored up grain in great abundance like the sand of the sea until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore them to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. The name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Those two, remember Ephraim and Manasseh, and the youngest one is Ephraim. Ephraim is going to become greater than Manasseh the firstborn. And odd how many times this happens, contrary to the tradition that happens in families. But when Joseph brings his 2 sons before it, Jacob is actually going to try to give the blessing to Ephraim, and Joseph says, no, he's not the firstborn. Manasseh is the firstborn. And but Jacob knows that he's going to bless the younger one. The 7 years of plenty, verse 53, that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. There was a famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. What he says, you do. What he says to you, do." So when the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was so severe over all the earth. Oh yeah, they're in it for money here. Yeah. So we come to the end of chapter 41. We're getting ready for chapter 42. And at this point, Joseph is simply over the land of Egypt. He's over the distribution of it. And at what point do you think it's going to occur to Joseph that one of these days his brothers are going to come for food? It's probably not until they walk through the door when he realizes it. And it's still, this plan of God that is coming about is probably coming slow, but Joseph at one point, we're going to see, because in chapter 42 his brothers are going to come. When Jacob learned, verse 1 of chapter 42, there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, so that we might live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. So at this point, Joseph was 30 years old when he came into the service. There's 7 years of plenty, so he's 37. Now we're coming into the famine. So Joseph is 37, and his brothers are going to be, his oldest one's going to be 14 years older than him. So how old is his oldest brother at this point? If the famine, if Joseph is about 37 or 38. He's going to be 51 years old after all this time. So he sends them down there. Now Joseph was governor over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land, and Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. They said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them. And he said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." They said to him, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." Verse 11, we are honest men. Does that ring? And you're thinking, for at least the last 20 years, all 10 of those have lived a lie before their father. All 10 of those brothers conspired to have Joseph killed. To one degree or another, a couple of them, Reuben and Judah, didn't really want it to happen, but in essence, they don't know what has happened to him. They just know that when they went back to the pit, that he was gone. Whatever happened to him. But we're honest men. We're not spies. Yeah, he's not going to lose his little baby boy there. He said to them, "No, it is the nakedness of the land that you have come to see." And they said, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, son of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, "It is as I said to you, you are spies, by this you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you, and let him bring your brother, while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." And he put them all together in custody for 3 days. On the third day Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God." And this word for God is Elohim. They would have recognized that as being their God. They would have known it as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is what he known, but they would have known this Elohim. He's not talking about the gods of Egypt. He's talking about the gods of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined where you are in custody, and let the rest go and carry grain for famine to your households, and bring your youngest brother with me. So your words will be verified, and you shall not die. And they did so. And they said to one another, in truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress in his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us. And Reuben said, and this is the part where the sibling rivalry comes into here, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? No, but you didn't listen. Can't you just hear him there? So now there comes a reckoning for his blood, and they believe that he's been killed. They did not know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. Then he turned away from them and wept, and he returned to them and spoke to them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. And Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, and so replace every man's money in the sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. This was done for them. And so we continue to read on. We drop down to verse 29. When they came to Jacob, their father, in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man, the Lord of the land, spoke roughly to us and took us to be spies of the land. But we said to him, we are honest men, we have never been spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father, one is no more, and the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the Lord of the land, said to us, by this I shall know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me, and take grain for the famine of your households, and go your way. Bring your youngest brother to me, then I shall know that you are not spies, but honest men. And I will deliver your brothers to you, and you shall trade in the land. As they emptied their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in the sack. When they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob their father said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has come up against me. Then Reuben said to his father, kill my 2 sons. And you think that Reuben's 2 sons are standing there? Pop, what, Pop? What did you just say? He says, kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you. But he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol. Can't you just imagine that? That scenario that's playing out here, and exactly as we read way back in chapter 37, where they became jealous of Joseph, and they quite assured they were never going to bow down to him. But now they've, continuing on in verse 43, now the famine was severe in the land, and when they had eaten the grain that they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, go ahead, buy us a little food. Then Judah said to him, the man solemnly warned us, saying, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. Israel said, why did you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother? They replied, the man questioned us carefully about ourselves and our kindred, saying, is your father still alive? Do you have another brother? What we told him was in the answer to these questions. Could we in any way know what he would say? Bring your brother down? And Judah said to Israel, his father, send the boy with me, and I will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and also our little ones. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before me, then let me bear the blame forever. If we had not delayed, we would have now returned twice. So they sort of delayed it and waited until they needed bread again in order to go back down there. And so it's going to continue on. They're going to go down to Joseph. They're going to get the grain. And once again, if we drop down to chapter 44, then at one point, let's see, we come down to here. Chapter 45. Chapter 45. They go through this, and we could read a lot of that, but I'll let you read that on your own. In chapter 45, when Joseph is bringing them into he's going to have a feast for them. Let's back up into chapter 44, verse 30. Now therefore, as soon as I come to your servant my father, the boy is not with us, then as his life is bound up with the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant and father with sorrow to Sheol, for your servant became a pledge of safety for the father. They're explaining as to what's going to happen if they don't take Benjamin back, because they planted that in Benjamin's bag so as to have to bring him back. For now, in the last verse of chapter 44, for how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father. Chapter 45, verse 1, Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. He cried, Make everyone go out from me. So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. It's me, Joseph. Yeah. I mean, imagine the brothers. It's me, Joseph. And what do you think? What do you think the thoughts? And we could speculate on it, but what do you think the thoughts were? Yeah, we're dead. It's absolutely incredible to think that I just, every time I read this, it gets me. It says, I'm Joseph. All of these years later, now we're talking 20 years later in all of this. They've had 20 years to think about this. And for anybody who has done something really, really bad in their life earlier, does that ever go away in your mind? Even if it was talking back to your mom, you never forget about it, do you? But here these brothers come back there and he says, I'm Joseph. I am Joseph. And imagine their thought, this guy who's the governor of Egypt is our brother now? So Joseph said to his brothers, verse 4, Come near to me, please. And they came near, and he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. Here it is. For God sent me before you to preserve life. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And he is second only to Pharaoh in Egypt. And Joseph could have said the word and said, you boys are going to prison. And let's see, it's been 20 years. Yeah, I think that ought to do. He had that power. But Tim, like you said, it is a story of grace. Joseph is a type of Christ in so many ways here. But when he says, for God sent me before you to preserve life. Now, God could have done it a lot of different ways to preserve life. But he chose this to show his grace, his majesty, his power, his authority over everything. He predicted the famine. He set it up so that Joseph would be sold into slavery. Now, do you think that God wanted all those bad things to happen to Joseph? Well, that's one to argue for the ages. No, but it came about, But Joseph realizes it. And do you think that Joseph is going to hold a grudge against God for doing this? No, it's not a good idea. Write that down. Not a good idea. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, so he's 39 years old now. And there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And that's, in modern terms, there's a book called Aha. Has anybody ever seen that book? Aha. This is one of those aha moments. It's a good book. It's an aha moment. You didn't send me here. God sent me here to preserve. Now, you and I will live a long life and struggle to connect dots as to where God has sent us and in what ways and how to figure it all out. But we have not been endowed with the gifts that Joseph has to connect all those dots in his life. But, as was mentioned earlier in the class of Romans 8:28, all things happen for the good, for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. We may not figure out all the dots to connect, but we have to be assured within our own minds that wherever we go, if we're doing the will of God, is because he has sent us there. Questions or comments before they ring the 8th bell? It already happened? Okay. You talk long enough, they won't get a chance to say anything. Okay. See you next year.